Okay, without much further ado, I'd like to hand over then to Lena and Ed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So let's get started. Are you recording? Yes, are we on?
Yes,
Fine.
yeah, we're recording.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Because I did advertise the event to some postgraduate students yesterday, but and some said that asked if it will be recorded because they couldn't attend today. So that's good. So Ed and I will get started. I will run the PowerPoint that we prepared for this. So here we go. Just a second, sorry. So play from start. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome. My name is Dr. Lena Simic and I am here at Edge Hill University. I work as a reader in drama, but I think for this presentation is probably more relevant that I'm also a local councillor and chair of Environment and Climate Change Select Committee at Liverpool City Council. I will let Ed introduce himself and then we're going to get started. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Ed Gommon and I've set up a community enterprise called Zero Carbon Liverpool City Region, which supersedes one I previously set up with the help of Kate Gilmartin, actually called Liverpool Community Renewables, which is a community benefit society. So we're moving on to the next slide. We're going straight in. And I'm also part of Merseyside Labour for a Green New Deal as well with Lena, although we're not going to be too political this time, I don't think, too party political. So the local manifesto was developed by Merseyside Labour for a Green New Deal group, as it says there, in collaboration with grassroots activists, MPs and trade unions. And the event took place in June 2019, and the manifesto we developed in the year following that offers proposals about what can be done locally within 10 areas which affect the green transition: jobs, housing, energy, green space, transport, health, etc. as it says there, and those are the links there to where you can actually download the manifesto and read it in full. Next slide, please. So what is the Green New Deal and how did we end up coalescing around that idea? So taking the latter point first, there's been a growing awareness about the seriousness of climate change and the adequate response to it over the last 2 or 3 decades. I don't want to delve too far back into the history of the climate movement. So in terms of just my experience, I became aware that climate change was an issue that was something I could no longer ignore and needed to act on in 2007. In 2009, the Copenhagen Accord was agreed by most parties, but was non-binding and widely recognised as a failure and a missed opportunity. So the Paris Agreement in 2015 was seen as correcting the failure of Copenhagen and finally recognising that net zero was the only target worth aiming for. We organised the first Zero Carbon Liverpool events in April to August 2017, trying to reach out beyond the usual suspects and spread the word to business and the council. Climate anxiety and action has come and gone in waves over the last decade, and the last high watermark was 2019, with XR's mobilisations, the ATMO intervention, and that led to the UK government and other councils of towns and cities across the UK declaring climate emergency. So what is a Green New Deal? The roots of the Green New Deal are in Roosevelt's Green New Deal in the mid to late 30s, a highly interventionist state-led response to the crisis of the Great Depression. Modern iteration emerged in the UK as a proposal for how to respond to the financial crisis of 2008-2009. It was a simple idea. If we're going to create hundreds of billions of pounds in quantitative easing, why not instead of just using it to prop up the banking sector, why don't you invest it in zero carbon infrastructure that would help us tackle the climate crisis, renewable energy, retrofitting buildings, etc. This call was ignored, and the political choice of the coalition and led to the Tories was devastating austerity. So the Green New Deal re-emerged in the US in 2017, 2018 via Andrea Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, and then recrossed back to the UK in 2018, 2019 with the Labour Party. at its core, the Green New Deal means dealing with the climate emergency as you would any other existential threat of this magnitude, like World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, and the financial crisis, where the response is not can we pay for it, is what do we need to do to respond to this crisis. This means mobilising the necessary levels of resources and focusing on the emergency to resolve it as quickly as possible. It is a state-led and directed response, marshalling all sectors, public, private, and third sector, and massive investment in developing and upgrading transport, energy, and built environment infrastructure to the level needed to get us to net zero into the time frame dictated by the science. So our approach has been built on the work of Zero Carbon Britain, who are based in the Centre for Alternative Technology in with 1 million climate jobs, which was a campaign against climate change publication written by the trade unions, and also bringing in the work of the Tyndall Centre and their scatter tool with the work in Greater Manchester, so using that to help determine our carbon budgets and the net zero, and what the net zero deadline would be. We then tried to scale it down. So all the reports that tend to be written at a national level. So we then tried to scale that down to city region scale. So because it seems like the challenge of climate change and the transition is an enormous challenge. We feel like if you don't break it down into a local context, it's kind of overwhelming for people. It seems too big. So for us as well, the Green New Deal contains within it an essential component, a concept and practice, which is that of the just transition. This is the recognition that restructuring our economy and society in 2 decades from hydrocarbon-based economy to one of a net zero society has the possibility to cause dislocation and negative consequences for certain industries and sectors, for example, North Sea gas and aviation. The only way we can reach the goal we want to, net zero, will be by managing the transition so it doesn't cause mass redundancies and economic insecurity, but instead is a managed decline of the sectors that will be most affected, with job guarantees, along with retraining and reskilling and redeploying affected workers. Thatcher closed the mines, and the unintended consequences of the dash for gas was significantly reduced carbon emissions. But this was not a just transition. Gilets jaunes in France arose from what was effectively a carbon tax on fuel, which passed the cost from the consumers, from the producers and the corporations onto the citizens, and which caused resentment and led to mass civil disobedience. A Green New Deal built on the principles of a just transition aims to avoid those issues. So Merseyside Labour for a Green New Deal emerged from the political moment of the Corbyn era, which was the Labour Party basically taking a lead on climate policy. And this led to many activists previously disengaged with party politics and Green Party members joining the Labour Party, seeing that as a viable vehicle for radical climate action. We started forming in 2018, the end of 2018, and the national campaign started in February 2019. We ran this event in June 2019, from which the Manifesto emerged. And it was the first thing we did really collectively as a group, and it was kind of a launch event. Organising this event, developing a zero carbon manifesto for Merseyside Labour for Green New Deal from Merseyside. Through the Labour Party and with the trade unions, we got significantly more Labour Party councillors than I've ever seen at any climate event in Merseyside over the last decade. So the manifesto itself was a combination of what came out of those workshops that we'd run at the event and existing best practice and research that we've done over the years from around the UK and the world. So once again, we find ourselves in an unprecedented crisis, this time a global pandemic, which may be in part caused by climate change and has caused massive economic damage and hardship and exposed the divisions once again between the haves and have-nots in this country. Once again, we're faced with a political choice about how to respond to this crisis, like we did after the financial crisis. The call this time has been to build back better, this time, rather than go for another round of austerity. We believe that the foundations of any Build Back Better campaign should be local and regional Green New Deals across all of the UK, and we should rise to the challenge and opportunity of the climate emergency to invest, train, create jobs, and build the infrastructure we need to get to net zero. Thank you, that's that bit done.
Lena, you're still on mute.
Oh, I should be stuff.
Apologies, it's just me trying to manage it all with sharing as well. So it's a bit difficult. Can I just please ask you a favor? When I'm sharing right now, you are seeing only the PowerPoint, right? You're not seeing my Word document as well.
Just your PowerPoint. That's all we can see, Lena.
Okay. That's great. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about democracy, and it's a quite a difficult one, democracy, because it means actually the engagement of lots of people and lots of groups. Now, here you see a quote from Anne Pettifor, who is a British economist, and she was talking about the Green New Deal. And she says, to be adopted widely, it has to ring true with the wider public, whose intelligence must never be underestimated. And that's a very important point, really, that we must not underestimate the intelligence of the people that we are all bringing with us through this transition, through this hopefully just transition that we are going with. So how can we take all these communities through the transition we inevitably all have to make? Who is leading the way? That's a massive question. Is it culture, possibly arts and culture? Is it big businesses? Should we trust them to lead the way? Is it politicians? Can we trust them? Is it climate movements, youth strikes and Extinction Rebellion? Is it academics whose research is being used to argue the case for transition? Policies and motions that are posed in the councils, local authorities, or the parliament? We have Climate Act 2008. We are one of the first, if not the first country to have a Climate Act. Everyday people, community groups. Who is it that acts differently at the end of the day in the face of this global warming? So in terms of democracy, we are talking here about local changes. And in particular, I'm going to take an example of Liverpool, because that's where I work as a council. So we got some funding for cycle pop-up lanes, and that was because of COVID, and the government gave some money. So we quickly had to do something. Of course, we all know that we want active travel. We need more cycling. We need more walking. We need more and better public transport. But how do we implement that? Do we go to the cyclists and residents and ask them? How do we consult them? Is it very important? Or do we just draw up a big map of possible lanes in the city and just give it and say, okay, let's do it like this? So in a way, and that's a line there as well, is that genuine democratic engagement also grants a political mandate for what might otherwise be unpopular decisions. So I know from the experience with these cycle lanes is, you know, it's been back and forth with unhappy residents, with unhappy motorists, with unhappy cyclists, and so on. And probably why? Because the proper consultation hasn't taken place. So democracy, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. And sometimes it's easier to just draw this big map with cycle lanes and give it to you, but and implement stuff from above. But it will backfire later. So actually taking everyone together through the just transition is very important. And also, I just want to use the example of, you know, we all know we need the biggest energy transition, that when we are moving now towards hopefully smaller municipal energy supplies. And so is this really a true people's opportunity to take ownership of more localized renewable energy supply, or do we let the big 6 companies do this for us? They currently own 70% of the market. So how can we mobilize this democratic engagement? I think, you know, Liverpool city is blessed with tidal river and offshore wind farms, and we could be one of the key green cities, not just in Britain, but also in the world if we are ambitious enough and if people want it. And of course, with the idea with climate change, there is citizens' assemblies that have been taken at the national level. In Birmingham, we've had some. Also, hopefully here we will have citizens' juries, which are less expensive, because the difference between citizens' assemblies is because they take a cross-section of society, whilst people's assemblies are basically self-selected, and it's mostly activists who come to those and demand things. But so I believe that we really need citizens' engagements, and we need more of these citizens' assemblies, even though they're expensive, and citizens' juries as well, and more democratic ownership rather than it being run by big businesses who shall I say, got us here in the first place. So next slide I need to move to now.
Lena, could you put it on slideshow, please, for us?
Yes, I will. It was just I needed to read my notes at the same time, so that's
Oh, okay,
right. Sorry.
That's fine. No,
Yeah,
that's easier
yeah.
for you. Then keep it that way, by all means.
No, it's fine now. It's Ed.
Oh, over to Ed. Okay.
Okay, so green spaces. I'll just leave the slide up and you can read what's on there, but I'll just talk over it. So I have to say it's interesting that I get this slide, because for years I've been frustrated by the way conversations about the environment or environmental issues would get turned away from climate change into one about green spaces. And I refer to this response to the climate emergency as the trees, flowers and carrots consciousness, maybe a bit unfairly, but it can be a vital step onto developing a fuller understanding of the climate emergency and how it can be a gateway drug into broader climate issues. However, it can also be the last refuge of the scoundrel when it comes to climate action, something that councils can fall back on as evidence that they are doing something about the environment and climate change, rather than taking the more difficult action, which would actually stop carbon emissions being emitted, rather than capture and sequester what gets pumped out. So in terms of green spaces, I'm going to frame this in terms of as partly looking at land ownership and democracy. So land ownership is a massive issue in this country, and it is still essentially a feudal dispensation in terms of who owns the land. The Crown is actually the only absolute owner of land in England and Wales, and all of us just hold estates in land. We don't actually even know who owns large amounts of the land in England. Up to 17% of it is unregistered. The Crown, the Church and conservation groups own about 12.5%. 30% is still owned by the historical aristocracy, and just as a way of contrast, homeowners only own actually 5% of land in England. The combined authority just created the Land Commission, or well, did create a Land Commission, I think it's finished now, to identify who owns the land in the city region. This is mainly to clarify what's council owned for the purpose of affordable housing development mainly, and the report will be out sometime in March, I think. However, depending on what they find and what land they own, that could be an opportunity to allocate more land to allotments for people who want them. Waiting lists for allotments are long, and people can wait years to get a plot, or it can identify land that could be turned into accessible green space and biodiversity hotspots. Tree planting is an essential part of land use when it comes to looking at not just making places more pleasant, but capturing the residual emissions, like the net zero in the net and net zero. There's some emissions that are just we're not going to be able to eradicate. So we need some way of capturing those emissions. And this natural carbon offsetting like this is, to my mind, the only kind of carbon capture and storage or bioenergy carbon capture and storage which we should be looking at. The Mersey Forest and Nature Connected are leading on this and coordinating action across the city, region and beyond. Interestingly, we were just talking with Liz Gray from Wirral Council last night, and she said Wirral Council had only just joined the Mersey Forest like this year or last year, which is kind of interesting to find out. But they'd planted 21,000 trees in the last year, which is pretty good. Also, as a coastal region, wetlands and marshes have very good carbon sinks, and over the last few centuries, many of these have been cleared and drained. So there's what we could do partly is look at identifying the areas that could be rewilded and returned to natural states to use them and develop natural carbon sinks to help us offset the emissions that we can't cut. Access to green space has been highlighted by the pandemic as a key social justice issue that affects people's quality of life, not in an abstract way, but in a directly impacting on citizens' mental and physical health. So we feel that all citizens need to have access to well-maintained green space within walking distance for their amenity. There are 2 local campaigns which bring carbon reduction, the climate emergency, maintaining green space and having accessible green space and biodiversity, and democracy, I'd say, as well, to a certain extent, where they all come together. Rimrose Valley and Oglet Shore. So Rimrose Valley is in Bootle. It's a very deprived ward. It's one that already has very high levels of ill health due to the very poor levels of air quality that already exist. The facilities and docks have been improved, and this will expand the capacity to handle freight, but no one seems to have thought about how to get the freight out of the port and connect it up to the network to where it needs to go. And the only idea that really has been proposed so far is to build a road through Rimrose Valley, which is one of the only bits of accessible green space in Bootle. The photo in this slide was taken on Rimrose Valley. The local councillors are against it, Sefton Council are against it. There's a community group that is opposing this, Save Rimrose Valley. However, Highways England and Peel are powerful adversaries, and it remains to be seen what the outcome will be. Oglet Shore is part of on the banks of the Mersey, and it's under threat from the proposed expansion of John Lennon Airport. Passenger numbers will only have just recovered from their pre-financial crisis peak in 2007, but the John Lennon Airport expansion is predicated on massively increasing passenger numbers. So recently, Leeds and Bradford Airport expansion has been approved, but before that, Bristol was denied, and obviously Heathrow was thrown out was blocked by the High Court, although that's been appealed. But I think these are the kind of battles which will be absolutely essential to turning the tide in the Liverpool City region and testing, putting to the test if people who are the people in charge and the people, the leaders of Liverpool City region and the councils are serious about whether we're in a climate emergency or not. And that's that one done.
Okay, so it's me now, and I'm going to talk a bit about learning. That's another one of our topics that we have in the manifesto. I mean, just to say that we've decided to focus on these 3. This is the last one, but you can download the manifesto that was created and look at all different topics that we have in there. We thought that these 3, which are, democracy and then green spaces and learning, are kind of relevant given that we are at university as well. So I already mentioned this carbon literacy project, that training that I took part in as a counselor. Now, this was done in 2 hours, this training first, and then we had another session for 5 hours. And it was tailored in particular for local councillors and council officers, focusing on what we can do in our communities, in our wards, and as Liverpool City Council. So, for example, we learned how to engage with the different voters, how to appeal to various groups, tactics on how to pass the message. We had a lot of small, easy suggestions like eat less meat, walk to school, get on your bike, plant wildflowers, buy local food, and so on. But we also had a list of actions that we can take as the local authority, which are actually similar to suggestions we have also in this manifesto around transport, active travel, retrofitting of our homes, the use of green spaces, apprentices and jobs, planning regulation, recycling, waste, and so on. Now, of course, I'm not going to talk about how important education is. We are at a university, and how transformative it is. But young people from schools to universities and beyond really need to be carbon literate. Even if they take this 2-hour training, I think it would be really transformative and extremely important. So we need some kind of plan to how to achieve this. Now, we have put out here some suggestions, but they were specifically for the Labour Party because we were working within the Labour Party structures. But I think that, we can adapt some of these to make them in workplaces too. So for example, having an environment officer in each workplace would be very useful, or having some kind of ambassadors who are going to be thinking about sustainability of each workplace. I mean, that would be just amazing, and it would be really good. And we talked a bit about this, to have some kind of module, or even in the induction, to get all the students trained in carbon literacy. So those are some of the ideas that we've had in terms of how do we go about learning. Of course, from primary school age as well, having eco-school programs, or parents or school governors pushing for this, and generally just the whole society through arts and culture as well, to be more aware about climate issues, because it's hitting us already. So it's not going away. And so now we are coming towards the end. Oh, we are right on time, 12:30. So we're coming towards the end of our presentation. So we have next steps and questions. We've just rewrote these to possibly suggest a few things here. Carbon literacy training, I just mentioned, writing to your councillors and MPs, maybe keep lobbying, joining a local community that has eco and sustainability issues at the center, create a climate emergency officer in your political party or workplace. So those are some that we thought of, but I'm sure other people have other suggestions too. Ed, is there anything you would like to add before we go into questions?
No, I'm happy for people to take some questions now and see what other people have come up with.
Okay,
so you're true Democrats. Well, thank you very much indeed, both Ed and Lena, for that talk. So yeah, who would like to ask a question, please, to our presenters?
Or a comment is fine.
Or a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put a link in the chat. Did you see the Lancaster citizens jury at all? Yeah, Ed did.
Yes. Thank you for
that,
Kate.
Yeah, I thought it was, I only caught up with it when they did the presentation of the process that they'd gone through. And it was incredibly enlightening and heartening. You had the stories of the people who'd been involved, who'd kind of been invited to participate according to their demographic, because they spent a lot of money to try and get the demographic of Lancaster's population within the panel. And it was really interesting to hear how people, said that previously they'd perhaps just thought everyone was being a bit alarmist about climate change and it didn't really impact them, and it was going to get sorted out by government. And then through this process of engagement and listening to the evidence through different speakers, with this process they went through, they'd realised that actually it's something that everyone's got to get on board with. And yeah, it was really heartening to see how they'd been empowered and then deliberated those presentations and things that they could actually do and come up with their own suggestions, which are now being led on by Kevin Freer at Lancaster councillor. So he's leading on their suggestions. So they're having direct action from the gathering of that evidence. So I thought it was a fantastic example, and it'd be good if a lot of the other councils took that on board as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this. So it's called People's Jury. So yeah, no, this is great. I will have a look in detail at it from the website link. I've just opened it that you sent. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it on to our cabinet member and see. But just thinking, it's called People's Jury, so it wasn't citizens. Was it just self-selected people, or was it organized?
No, it was I mean, apparently it was quite expensive for that reason, that they actually did a kind of a cross-section demographic of the citizens of Lancaster. So they matched the demographic as closely as they could. So yeah, I mean, people were asked in a group, so it was a certain amount of self-selecting, but the way people were invited was done demographically. Yeah, and I've also shared the link to the Climate Change Committee's sixth carbon budget report. And there are different webinars on their website, and I listened to one yesterday, which is about the local authorities' role within this.
Yeah.
And that was really, really good. It's only about 40 minutes long, but, you know, highlights that, you know, local authorities have, I mean, we're talking about communities and, you know, the interface. I mean, I work in community energy, which is all about, like Ed does, you know, about kind of enabling action at kind of grassroots level. But, you know, even local authorities don't really have that very good interface with communities. But yet, I think it's something like 65% of actions around decarbonisation are around societal behavioural change, whether that's, you know, getting rid of your gas boiler, switching to electric vehicle, retrofitting your home. And I'm working on some low carbon projects trying to look at getting villages off oil. And, you know, I kind of compare it to rolling out broadband, you know, or super fast broadband or whatever. You know, you knock on someone's door and say, do you want to have super fast broadband? And they go, yeah, I do. I really want that. But you knock on the door and say, would you like some low carbon heating? And they're like, no, I'm fine, actually. Yeah. Are we going to get a cost saving? No, I'm not bothered then. So it's like the motivation and drivers are so different. And how do we motivate and drive people to the change that has to happen? And it's just such a hard thing to do. And no one, apart from community groups who kind of self-activate and create momentum within their community, you know, local authorities haven't got capacity to do that. And if you pay third-party agencies to do that, it's going to cost a fortune. So there's a real kind of, there's not quite a match of, they're not dovetailing very well at the moment. And there needs to be a lot of movement towards trying to interface better with communities. So yeah, Ed, did you put your hand up then? Did you want to?
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Kate. Ed's been dying to say something for the last 2 minutes.
No, it's just, I think everyone's, you know, we're covering a lot of ground there, and it is going from the citizens' assemblies and the citizens' juries. So we looked into that a little bit in the Liverpool City region, and I think the difference between citizens' assemblies and citizens' juries is size, basically. So citizens' juries smaller, but you still use the same way of selecting them, but it can be quite an expensive process. So that is something that might put off councils. So it is, I think you're looking at kind of like carbon literacy, mass carbon literacy versus citizens' assemblies. Maybe it's like what's the best way forward in terms of how you get people educated. So, for example, Lena's led in Liverpool City Council on the carbon literacy training for councillors and officers within Liverpool City Council. Liz Gray was doing that at Wirral, and she was basically saying they want to have that as a rolling programme, so that every year all the councillors and officers are trained in carbon literacy training. And I've been working with someone recently, and they're developing they've had some funding from the city region to develop carbon literacy training for community groups. And again, I kind of feel like I always seem to think on a city region scale as like, how do we kind of standardise what's going on and just have a plan so that we're getting to the most places, and how, you know, what can we develop for schools and the different sectors. So like, I'm not sure how early you can start teaching it, but I reckon maybe top year primary school, you can maybe start teaching it, and then into secondary school and beyond.
I think even earlier, I think the children are quite aware now, you know, with their age. But what was interesting with carbon literacy training was it was done by the Center for Sustainable Energies. The person who trained us was from the Center of Sustainable Energies. It was very much tailored for councillors and for council officers, but that was good, because, you know, let's say if they were doing it at university, they would be tailoring it for that particular workforce. But what was really interesting is like how they broke down people into various voters, you know, dependent on whom they're likely to support on the basis of climate, just looking at climate issues and sustainability as how far up it is, you know, in terms of your voting preferences. So of course you have climate activists, you don't need to talk to them, they're going to come to you, they're going to come and lobby you on one hand. But then on the other hand, you might have people who are like disenfranchised, precarity, who are actually have quite low carbon footprint, but they're just not engaged in politics. So how are you going to talk to them about climate issues? And there was, I think, 7 groupings that we were looking at, and we had little workshops on how to talk about climate issues with each of these potential residents or voters. So it's kind of that communication is really crucial, because one message doesn't, there is no just one message. It's many messages how to get to people. Some people, it's more likely that they will, this is what they were saying, that, it's more likely that they will get into climate thinking around, say, agriculture and buying British produce and the ideas around that. So that's on one hand. And then the other people, they might be more interested in, I don't know, like fighting against airport expansion and so on. So it's like it's a variety of approaches that would work. And also, like, which people were interested. Us as as Liverpool councillors were interested to read a lot around young people and job apprentices schemes, retrofitting and economy, stuff like this. We were not interested to read newspaper articles around military and faith. All of these were very much about climate, but you could see what attracted particular grouping of people, and which were the ones we wanted to engage with, and how to help, and with the just transition and job opportunities, for example. So yeah, just thought to share, but thank you so much for sharing that link.
Thank you very much. Has anyone else got a question, please, for Lena or Ed? Or Lena and Ed? Yes, Michelle.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I arrived a little late, so didn't capture everything. It's not so much a question, it's a reflection. I was in a periodic review meeting 2 weeks ago, and the external members of the panel from different institutions were talking about how they've had to revalidate their own programs and the writing of new modules, and how those modules are having to contain up to 150 hours of placement. So we're kind of entering this economy of students are coming to the university, but the shift of the education having to happen in work-based environments and placements. And obviously I'm hearing the arguments here about we need more young people to be involved in all of these things and the need to promote. For me, it sounds like if departments or programs are looking to revalidate or be rewritten, that there has to be a sustainable, specific module on each course. Like there has to be eco dance, there has to be dance and ecology, there has to be creative arts and ecology specific to. And then we have these huge cohorts that can actually be out in the world doing the practice. It can't just sit as an optional. So at the moment I am in a position of interim program leader, so I am in a position where this is something that I can potentially negotiate, navigate, encourage other colleagues, but it has to be specific, I think, not optional.
Yeah.
Can I just add something, Michelle? You're probably aware that we're organising in just 2 weeks' time a sustainability, education for sustainability at Edge Hill University, and led by John Sanders. So we're going to be discussing those very issues.
Great.
At least in the Edge Hill context, but there may be some other people. We've actually got quite a few SustainNET partners who are going to be participating as well, and other external parties participating in this event. It's on the SustainNET website, and we'll be sending out more promotional communications about it. It's on the 10th of Wednesday, the 10th of March. But yeah, you're right. I think it's, well, I mean, over to Ed and Lena, if you want to make any particular comments on this issue of how do you educate the public for these kind of initiatives and participate in these kind of processes that you referred to in your presentation.
I think from an academic point of view and as a researcher, I think this is one of the crucial parts of research at the moment. You know, yeah, from the theoretical perspectives, you know, you have, say, Donna Haraway, and that is a lot to do with, and that's feminist philosophy, and it's our relationship with ecology, with more than human world. In a way, you know, it's what's driving the grants as well, if you want to be quite pragmatic about it. You know, if you're applying for money in terms of research, that has to be around ecology and sustainability. So it's definitely the way how the world is going. Now, we always have freedom in terms of creating our curriculum on what we are teaching the students. I mean, I'm thinking from my subject perspective in terms of performances and theater. You know, I can choose to teach them around, you know, performances and theater that is connected with climate change. You have a, for example, climate change theater action that comes every 2 years. There is 50 playwrights that write short plays around climate, and I engaged with my students in putting out, you are allowed to take these plays and to, you know, do the readings or to do performances. So we did that. So that's one way how you can have climate issues in the curriculum without it kind of being dictated, as if, you know, you don't have to change anything within your module. So I think that's another way of how you can be pushing for discussions around how we are going to have transition to greener societies. So yeah, I think that's it's crucial, absolutely. But I do think that we should also, because this is just individual and it's just say my ideas of what I can teach and how. But I think there is an argument for this carbon literacy training, so that there is some kind of a standardized thing as well. I mean, you know, the one that I have undertaken, the first one is only 2 hours. I mean, when you think about it, it's 2 hours in one's life, and you know, you're going to come out and start thinking about climate a bit more and sustainability, if nothing else. So I would push for that as well in terms of education. Ed, do you want to add?
Yeah,
Thank you,
so yeah, so there is I put that carbon literacy project in there, but there is a website. If you kind of Google carbon literacy project, that they are the kind of the people who do the standardized teaching. So the one I did with Energy Projects Plus, that was like an 8-hour course over 2 sessions. So it's like 4 hours and 4 hours. And I think that tends to be the kind of standard as far as I know, but I mean, maybe you do something specific for counsellors. So yeah, I mean, I really think that this is something I'd be very interested in discussing and taking further with people in education, in terms of people who have, that's their strength. It's like, how do we work with with people who have that skill set to develop that and make sure we're making the most of those opportunities and the training. Just to kind of take us away slightly from education and training, I'm just thinking, partly just to throw this back at people at Edge Hill University. So, you know, we've written a Green New Deal for Liverpool City region, kind of a bit, you know, it's in outline. What would a Green New Deal for Edge Hill University look like? What would you need to do to get to net zero? Or, you know, is that something that is a conversation that you're having?
Well, I can tell you that we already, I'm not too sure if it's a net kind of carbon position from Edge Hill. I think all of our electricity we source from renewable sources. I think we have a green tariff, which enables us to claim we're net zero electricity consumer. But I guess from the university's point of view, as an organization rather than a specific local community, we have strategies like you know, companies do, and like organizations like councils have. So what we did, just very briefly, because I want to get Leanne in to ask her question as well, in answer to your question, Ed, was that when the university put round its draft strategy from 2021 to 2025, SustainNET inputted into that process. It was actually quite democratic, and the Vice Chancellor was very supportive of receiving our contributions on how we could substantially increase the content on sustainability in the strategic plan. So that's what we're kind of currently working to. I mean, I think there are some universities which are actually quite well developed in terms of their sustainability strategies, like Plymouth is a very good example, Westminster is another one. But there's always things that we could be doing. We're actually creating, partly as a result of that conversation we had with the directorate of the university who run the whole kind of organization, about creating a more joined up structure for coordinating and communicating what's going on regarding sustainability on various fronts. So this new group, which actually I'm going to be leading, will have all the sustainability leads at Edge Hill University coming together for the first time, including Ethan, who's president of our Sustainability Student Society. So that's kind of what we're doing in answer to your question. We can come back to that if you like, but I'd like to give Leanne a chance to ask her question, then you can come back to me, Ed, if you like.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
Is that all right? In the kind of spirit of democracy, I'd like to give Leanne a chance to ask her question.
Yeah, I might not be able to hear the answer either because I've got to go at 12, so apologies for that. But maybe it's more of a reflection than a question. I was just feeling slightly uncomfortable because it kind of, some of this, I mean, I understand the importance of community engagement and education in terms of shifting the future and education agenda in terms of technology and climate change and being able to live our lives fundamentally differently. We're going to need to educate people in order to be able to do that. We definitely understand that we need to engage the community in any kind of radical change that happens in the way that we live our lives, which has got to happen. The bit that's making me uncomfortable with it, it's slightly reminding me of the COVID debate where the government's blaming the public for breaking the rules rather than taking the action, top-down action that actually is needed in an emergency. So I'm just worried that we're shifting the kind of we're fiddling while Rome burns, if you like, and does seem to be that there has to be some top-down as well as community engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely. I mean, I mean, this is why I use this example with cycle lanes in Liverpool and pop-up cycle lanes. So in a way, that was top-down. But because we received the money as the city council from the government, and we have to quickly spend this money. There was a kind of a quick deadline, and we implemented the cycle lanes. But the problem then becomes that because there wasn't a proper consultation done around some areas, and the problem then becomes that people are not happy, and so in a way it backfires. So I mean, of course, we have we make policy ideas, changes in policy, but unless you are going to engage the people, it's not going to work. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, at the moment, this is a really interesting one. It's around divestment. So you have divest councils. Councils are still currently holding large amounts of money, putting it through pensions into fossil fuel companies.
I suppose my question is, I'm questioning whether it's the intelligence of the people that's the problem, or whether it's government, lack of government drive that is the problem. So I'm worried that we're shifting the debate. Is the problem that the people are too stupid for us to implement climate change? And I'm thinking it's the other way around, actually, that the government is too stupid to do anything about climate change.
No, absolutely. They're lagging behind. They're lagging behind, but you need to have the conversation with the policymakers, with the governments, local governments or MPs. I mean, otherwise it's not going to work. I mean, it's not either or. Who am I? I'm both. I'm not because I'm a politician, I'm now on this side. I'm also a human being, a resident that wants change. So I think it's like, it's not useful, I don't think, to be putting people into these categories in terms of
Yeah, that was my concern, that's what we were doing. We're saying, you know, nothing's being done about climate change because the people are too stupid. And I don't think that's the case. I think nothing's been done about climate change because big business and government don't want to do anything about climate change. It's too radical, it's too difficult. And it requires a fundamental rethink about how we live our lives, and governments aren't prepared to do that.
Ed wanted to come in, I think, Leanne, and to respond as well, if that's okay.
Well, I mean, Leanne pretty much just said it in that last bit there, which is exactly right, that it's not that there's, you know, it's not that the people are too stupid. We've had no lack of leadership for decades on this, and that's so we find ourselves in a bad situation. And that's kind of what Zero Carbon Liverpool City Region is about for me, which is like trying to find a way of bridging the gap between strategic leadership stuff and grassroots action. But yeah, but exactly, and which is why the Green New Deal was, you know, was important. How the Green New Deal emerged out of the Corbyn project, which was a radical program of challenging power and shifting power to local people, like further down the food chain, taken away from big businesses and stuff like that. Which is now, you know, obviously now we're in a bad situation again, where this now seems unrealizable at a national level. So now we're back at the kind of like, what can we do in the full city region?
Yeah, Kate wanted to come in as well. Kate, didn't you?
Yes.
I think.
Thanks, Chris. I was just going to say that, you know, historically, government rely on market mechanisms to make change happen. So hence the feed-in tariff was a subsidy that drove massive growth in renewable electricity. And it did it very effectively. You know, we've gone halfway to decarbonising the grid in the last 13 years, which is ahead of what we expected. But what they're not very good at is using, you know, market mechanisms to create the change that needs to happen, as in people switching to electric vehicles or people switching to low carbon heat. That's the bit where the market drivers won't really work, or they can't afford to do it. So I think it's like you said, Leanne, you know, the strategy is not there. The framework for that delivery isn't there because they're so embedded in market-driven mechanisms and creating market-driven mechanisms and allowing the free market to do everything, that they don't want to be a nanny state and they don't want to tell us what to do. So they're just kind of, you know, they don't want to be the bad guys and say, no, this has got to happen, and this is how we're going to force you to do it. But so there's just this massive gulf. But I think, you know, I've noticed that there's a really big change in kind of the tone and tempo of government. You know, they know this has got to happen, and they are looking for ways of how to make it happen. But it's just difficult. But, you know, across the different departments as well, they know this has got to happen. I mean, it's not politically motivated. It's a fact now that climate change is happening, and it's a widely accepted fact. But yeah, sorry, Ed.
Yes, Ed, do you want to come back quickly?
Well, just quickly. I mean, I think that's, you know, we have reached this point now where even the Tories have said, like, this stuff needs to happen, and the target they set for the sixth carbon budget was 68% by 2030, which is like a 30% reduction over the next decade, which is like an insane kind of carbon emission target. And then, but then you are wondering, like, what is a Tory Green New Deal going to look like? Or, you know, how, you know, the way the Tories are going to do this isn't going to be a way which spreads power and equality, like does it in a way which improves people's lives for the majority. It's going to be done in a way which tries to capture profit for a small amount of people as possible. So there's just those tensions there. They still got to do it, but there could be other mechanisms, or there's approaches to it which are much more people focused. And the problem is, like, if they do, you know, see what Macron did in France, and they did the carbon tax. Effectively, the people are paying the tax, so then they resist it. So this is how, you know, how's that going to work, basically?
I think it's a fear is that we're going to have green capitalism, you know, that in a way we are not really changing the system, which is an our opportunity to actually, this is an opportunity to change the system, how we engage with each other and with our economy. And in a way, I'm not sure that's going to happen. So we are just going to have the same polluters who have done this to the planet, just making profit again. And it's hashtag green capitalism, as unfortunately, that's the fear, I think. And yeah, of course, my aim is to fight against that. And I think, just lots of people's feel that now we have an opportunity to really change the system. I mean, Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, that was about connections of capitalism and climate crisis. And in a way, Green New Deal that was developed by Labour under Corbyn was our opportunity. And now we are sulking a bit, I think. But all is not lost. It's about changing it democratically with people, together with people. We are the people, after all. That's the whole point. We are the people.
If I can just add one or two things. I mean, there are different types of Green Deal, aren't there? It depends on how, the philosophy and the ethos behind it. The EU has a Green New Deal as well. I just, when Leanne was asking her questions and I was talking about kind of social cultural issues, I'm always kind of teaching my students about why is it Scandinavian countries are so environmentalist? Why are they so deeply eco? Why are they different as society, maybe to others? Why do they embrace environmentalism? Why are they more educated about it? So yeah, there's some really, really big. I think what your talk has done is raise a really big issues for debate, kind of going forward, and yeah, put some really interesting issues out there for us to reflect on and to consider further. So I'm going to draw things to a close now because my cuckoo clock has just struck 1. So thank you all very much indeed for participating. Special thanks to Lena and to Ed. Special round of applause for you. Thank you very much indeed. And there'll be a recording of this onto the web page for this event, this webinar, plus the slides already on the web page as well. So thank you all very much, and look out for more announcements for future webinars from SustainNET.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye. Enjoy the sunshine.